Pete is the oldest continuously recurring character of the Walt Disney Company and the first ever Disney villain, and over the course of 94 years has undergone some of the most radical changes and evolutions of any Disney character, having undergone changes in character and animation design, personality, name, and even species. While he is usually depicted as a villain, it's perhaps more fair to call him an antagonist, as shorts and films have seen him ranging from a ruthless criminal outlaw to a pesky authoritative figure to a plain and simple nuisance and everything in between, often changing his name and persona to fit each narrative. Pete has not only featured as the adversary or foil of Mickey, Goofy, Donald, Oswald, and Alice over the years, but also as their antithesis, placing him in roles that see him as the polar opposite of those he comes up against. In this video, I will trace the evolution of Pete right from his first appearance in 1925 to today in 2019. To do so, we will look at the most drastic and important changes prevalent across more than 9 decades of shorts and series, in this edition of Explaining Disney. Pete was first introduced as an antagonist in 1925 short Alice Solves the Puzzle, the 14th short in Walt Disney's first series of shorts, the Alice Comedies. In this short, Pete appears as Bootleg Pete, a nasty bear who gets in the way of Alice solving a crossword puzzle by trying to steal it for his collection of rare crossword puzzles. Alright, perhaps not the pinnacle of Disney storytelling, but the short introduces us to the irritant, troublemaking nature of Pete. In this short, Pete wears no clothes, appearing more animalistic than in later incarnations, and can be seen with a peg leg, an often defining characteristic of his character design. In 1925's Alice Wins the Derby, Pete makes his second appearance. However, this time he is seen without his peg leg. I must note that throughout Pete's 94-year history, he is sometimes depicted with his peg leg and sometimes without. It's said that at various points throughout his history, either animators forgot which leg was supposed to be peg-legged, so they omitted it altogether, or Walt felt that the shtick was just too exaggerated and painful to watch. It is interesting, however, to see that this strange trend takes its roots right back to his second appearance. By Pete's fourth appearance in 1925 short Alice Picks the Champ, of which only a few minutes still exist, he is for the first time ever depicted as wearing pants, the first step towards a more humanized anthropomorphic character, marking one of the very first examples of a Disney animal appearing in clothing. In this short, he appears in a more aggressive manner, showing the first signs of a hostile, somewhat violent personality. In 1925's Alice's Tin Pony, Pete takes his hostility to a whole new level, appearing for the first time in a more villainous role, as Pete and his gang of thieves attempt to rob a train driven by Alice and her pal Julius the Cat. In this short, Pete's peg leg is back, and he is seen for the first time wearing a hat, another defining characteristic of his design. Pete's most iconic hat design, however, would first be seen in 1926's Alice on the Farm. Though Pete's hat would quickly become a staple of his character design, his peg leg would continue to come and go somewhat randomly throughout the remainder of his appearances in the Alice Comedies. Pete appeared in a total of 19 Alice Comedies between 1925 and 1927, many of which have sadly been lost to time. Walt Disney's second short series, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, came about after interest and creativity began to wane in the Alice Comedies. Pete would transition over into the Oswalds in the 7th short, The Ocean Hop, where Walt Disney decided Oswald needed an antagonist. Instead of creating a new one, he decided to once again use Pete, referred to in the Oswalds as Putrid Pete. Though here, Pete appears with a more stylized design. He's taller, skinnier, and seems not to resemble a bear as much as he once did. You'll notice here that he appears with his peg leg and now iconic hat, but also appears in a vest and white gloves, which would become a staple of his design, but not for many years. Pete would go on to feature in 10 out of the 27 Disney Oswalds, many of which have also been lost, much like the many Alice Comedies. Pete would appear mostly the same in all of his Oswald appearances, with the only major difference being his constantly changing leg. By 1928's Ozzie of the Mounted, Pete was finally being depicted in a larger stature with a more bulbous stomach, and was drawn in a pair of large overalls, which would also become iconic of the character's design. Pete's final appearance in a Disney Oswald short came in 1928's Hungry Hobos. During this same year, the Disney Oswald series came to an end when Universal Pictures, who owned the rights to the Oswald character in cartoons, established their own animation studio and stole the Oswald series, along with most of Walt Disney's animators, away from him. Universal would keep the series in production for almost another 10 years under the direction of Walter Lantz. In response, Disney started up yet another short series focusing on a troublemaking little mouse named Mickey. For Mickey's second produced short, The Galloping Gaucho, Walt called for the introduction of a villain, and thus introduced a newly stylized version of Pete. The new Pete now appeared much larger in height and size, and though he had no peg leg, he sported those iconic overalls and hat. Pete also transitioned from being a bear to a cat, and as a result gained a more cat-like face with whiskers and scruffy ears as well as a long tail. Pete would consequently appear in Steamboat Willie, the third produced yet first released Mickey cartoon, in much the same design. While Pete remained nameless in these early shorts and went under the name Terrible Tom in early comic strips, the character is undoubtedly the same from the original Alice and Oswald, albeit with some cosmetic changes. In 1929's The Barn Dance, he would gain long white gloves before being transitioned into short white gloves in Barnyard Battle. In 1930's The Cactus Kid, he would once again take on the name Peg Leg Pete, well, technically in this short, Peg Leg Pedro, and would finally be reunited with his peg leg. This would also be the first time Pete is seen wearing shoes. Here, Pete would once again be depicted as an outlaw villain against hero Mickey. Conversely, in Pete's following appearance in 1930's The Chain Gang, the roles are reversed. Mickey is depicted as a prison inmate, while Pete is depicted as a ruthless prison warden, as he takes on the opposite role of Mickey. Regardless whether criminal or authority figure, Pete is always seen as the bad guy of the film. One obscure detail that I think is interesting to note is that while Walt continued to legally use the character of Peg Leg Pete, Universal continued to legally use him too, as he would feature in occasional Lance Oswald cartoons right up until 1937, and even strangely transitioning into a rabbit at one point. This would make Pete practically one of the only cartoon characters to ever be utilized by two separate studios simultaneously, and is a great example of just how murky copyright laws were at the time. By 1932, Mickey short The Klondike Kid, Pete was once again featured in his outlaw persona and underwent a slight redesign, as artist Norm Ferguson, a talented character artist, worked on refining his facial structure in an effort to award the character more personality. To do so, Ferguson used actor Wallace Berry as his inspiration. In this short, Pete took on the persona of Pierre the Trapper. Between 1932 and 1934, Pete's design remained practically the same, though he would often be featured in different costumes depending on his role in any given short. By this stage, Pete had started to more closely resemble the big bad that we all know and love. Note his protruding face and whiskers, and overall more lively and emotive appearance. In 1932's The Mad Dog, Pete would speak his first words, provided by Walt Disney himself. Though voice actor Billy Bletcher would take over voicing duties on the character from 1934's Shanghai, introducing his classic large, booming voice.
Get below, you swabs!
In that same year's The Dog Napper, he would not only go up against Mickey Mouse, but also Donald Duck for the first time. 1935's Mickey's Service Station would see Pete go up against Mickey, Donald, and Goofy in the trio's first classic team-up cartoon, as Pete takes on the role of an obnoxious, disgruntled customer. It's interesting to note that in this short, as well as in a couple of others, Pete speaks with a somewhat foreign accent, despite still being voiced by Billy Bletcher.
I'll be back in 10 minutes.
This short would mark Pete's final appearance in black and white. In Moving Day, Pete would appear in colour for the very first time, and would also be given a slight redesign, utilising artist Fred Moore's newly introduced squash and stretch techniques, which allowed characters the ability to move more freely and realistically, as if they had a real weight and could abide by the rules of gravity. While body shapes of other characters change from rounded to pear-shaped to properly employ these techniques, Pete, the large oaf, remained largely rounded. This meant he couldn't inhabit squash and stretch as well as the other characters when it came to flexibility, but he was able to take advantage of a more emotive range of expressions and bodily movements, giving him a whole new life, personality, and realism. In this short, Bletcher's booming American accent once again returned for perpetuity with this now classic line.
You ain't paid the rent.
In 1937's The Worm Turns, Pete faced yet another evolution, which would see him lose his peg leg for good in the classic shorts period, now taking on a persona commonly known as Big Bad Pete. In 1939, Pete was utilised as the antagonist of Donald Duck in Officer Duck, marking the first time he would appear in a Donald solo short. After Mickey and Friends had undergone yet another redesign by Fred Moore that very year, allowing them to be cuter, more expressive, more human, and more attractive to audiences, Pete followed suit. Again, Pete's design didn't change drastically, but his character animation became more fluid and more refined. His eyelids also became shiny, in keeping with animation trends of the time. 1940's Mr. Mouse Takes a Trip would feature Pete's final starring role as a villain in a Mickey Mouse short. Here his new design would become more prominent as he is ushered towards a new era. Pete would appear in two more solo Donald Duck shorts, 1940's The Riveter and 1941's Timber. At this time, the popularity of Mickey Mouse had begun to wane, while both Donald and Goofy became audience favourites. These two shorts transitioned Pete into the role of Donald's main antagonist, as Disney were preparing to throw Mickey into a temporary retirement during the war, only giving him a small revitalization afterwards. Despite retiring Mickey, Disney still wanted to continue the use of their oldest active character and recurring villain. That said, 1942 Mickey short Symphony Hour, Mickey's penultimate wartime short, would mark Pete's final appearance in a Mickey Mouse cartoon after appearing in a total of 23. Here, Pete would appear in a surprisingly compassionate role as the sponsor of Mickey's symphonic band, even embracing Mickey with a warm hug at short's end. What a way to end a 14-year rivalry. Throughout the height of World War II, the temperamental troublemaker that was Donald Duck became the figurehead for Disney's propaganda and wartime shorts, and along with him every step of the way in 6 shorts between 1942 and 1943, Pete would follow, appearing as Donald's antagonistic army superior, where he would take on the mantle of drill sergeant, sergeant, and jump master. Also interesting to note is that during this time, Pete would be presented as a spy for Nazi Germany in 1943 comic strip story arc Mickey Mouse on a Secret Mission by Floyd Gottfredson. 1944's Donald short Trombone Trouble would mark Pete's final appearance in any Disney film for almost 10 years. Pete would be utilised once again in 1952's Two Gun Goofy, appearing for the first time as the villain of a Goofy solo short. Here he would take on the role of Pistol Pete in somewhat of an homage to some of Pete's earliest Mickey Mouse appearances. He would appear in only one more Goofy short, How to Be a Detective, released that same year, but again he would take on a persona, this time round that of Al Mundoon, a shady 1940s film noir type corrupt cop. Following this, Pete would only appear in 2 more Donald Duck shorts, 1952's The New Neighbour, which would feature him in his first suburban everyman antagonistic neighbour appearance, which would be utilised decades later, and 1953's Canvasback Duck, where he would take on yet another bizarre moniker, Pee-wee Pete. Pete's final classic cartoon appearance, however, would strangely be in 1954's Chip and Dale cartoon, The Lone Chipmunks, where he would once again be depicted as a Wild West outlaw under the name of Black Pete. After this time, the character of Pete was thrown into retirement alongside Mickey. It wouldn't be until 1983's extended Mickey short, Mickey's Christmas Carol, that most Disney characters would return back to animation, taking on roles from Charles Dickens' classic novel. Pete naturally takes on the antagonistic role of the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come in his traditional 1940s-50s design, complete with iconic cigar. Pete would also appear in 5 episodes of the first season of 1987's DuckTales, where just like in the Mickey shorts, he would take on a number of villainous personas, such as Sharky, Dogface Pete, Captain Blackheart, Captain Pietro, and Genghis Khan. He would appear in 1990's extended Mickey short, The Prince and the Pauper, once more taking on a new antagonistic persona as Guard Captain Pete. However, Pete's most prominent 90s appearance came in 1992's TV series Goof Troop, where he would be presented in his everyday guy antagonistic neighbour persona, complete with loving family. Here, Pete would be teamed up with Goofy as a best friend, although one with a lot of contempt. While no longer a villain character, Pete still appears manipulative, scheming, and exploitative of his friend Goofy. Karma would always prevail, however, always finding himself the casualty of Goofy's many blundering mishaps and disastrous adventures. Interesting to note here that as Pete is thrown into a world of dogs, he no longer resembles a cat, instead taking on a more dog-like appearance. Goof Troop would also mark the very first time Pete would be voiced by Jim Cummings, who still voices the character today in 2019. Pete would also appear in this same anti-hero role in the two Goof Troop spin-off movies, a Goofy movie in 1995 and an extremely Goofy movie in 2000, as well as in the Goof Troop inspired sequence in Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas in 1999. In 1999 series Mickey Mouse Works, Pete would once again return to his villainous ways, once again taking on a more cat-like appearance in a series of shorts where he antagonizes and schemes against Mickey and the gang, though he would often be depicted with a full set of teeth instead of just a couple. In 2001's House of Mouse, he would appear with the similar persona and appearance, though with only a few teeth again, as the evil landlord of the House of Mouse, who often sabotages Mickey and his friends' efforts to run a show. Pete would then appear in 2004's Mickey, Donald, Goofy, The Three Musketeers, taking on the persona of Captain Pete. After 67 years, Pete finally gets his peg leg back in one of his most villainous roles of all time, and almost 80 years after his debut appearance, just as all good Disney villains, finally gets his own villain song, Petey's King of France. In 2006 series Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, Pete would appear in CGI animation for the very first time. Here he would be depicted much the same as in Goof Troop, with his evil streak nowhere to be seen. Obviously, as the series is aimed at younger viewers, Pete's depiction in Clubhouse sees him as more of a pest, annoying Mickey and his pals more so than trying to scheme and plot against them. In 2013's Get a Horse, an homage to classic Mickey cartoons, Pete would once again appear as the villain in his most classic 1930s-40s peg leg Pete design, as he antagonizes Mickey and Minnie. As the short transitions from traditional animation to CG at the end, we get our first look at Pete's classic design in CG animation in a film. Most recently, however, Pete has appeared multiple times in the 2013 Mickey Mouse series by Paul Rudish, which sees him again return to his classic look, albeit in a more stylized form. Here he appears more cat-like than ever, with an unmistakable feline design, and he often wears his classic iconic overalls, hat and gloves, and of course has his peg leg. Outside of the cartoons, Pete's villainous nature has also been capitalized on in more recent years as the main antagonist and villain of the epic Mickey and Kingdom Hearts games, where he appears in a more traditional appearance, albeit in more fantastical costumes. With his current iterations, Pete hasn't quite come full circle, but at least he, as Disney's oldest recurring character and longest serving villain, remains in the spotlight. And with that, it's over to you guys out there. I want to know, what is your favourite Pete appearance over the last 94 years? Fire away in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, you like what you've seen, you'd like to see more like this in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now, and also hit that like button down below if you're feeling extra generous. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.